The sound of Rebecca Thorne's skull meeting the marble floor reverberated through Whitmore Academy's Gothic library with the sharp intensity of gunfire in a church. Crimson blood seeped from the wound above her brow, creating red drops that hit the spotless floor with steady rhythm. Standing over her was Thomas Blackwood, his expensive footwear mere inches from her head, his clenched fists pale as ivory, shaking with something more fundamental than anger. 200 pupils crowded near the tall shelving units, their mobile devices held aloft like contemporary flames, recording each second of what was meant to be yet another typical degradation of the vulnerable by the powerful. However, Rebecca Thorne, lying on the frigid floor with blood creating irregular designs on her fair complexion, did something that would plague Thomas Blackwood for what remained of his brief existence. Her lips curved upward. This wasn't the anxious grin of someone defeated or the harsh smile of vengeance, but rather the calm expression of someone who had anticipated this precise instant. With purposeful slowness, she removed the blood from her mouth, raised herself onto one arm, and uttered 5 words that would demolish the Blackwood legacy permanently. Your grandfather's burial site. Section 7. Arlington. The shift in Thomas Blackwood's expression seemed to violate natural laws. Human skin doesn't lose color that rapidly unless cardiac function ceases. Yet his complexion transformed from arrogant rage to deathly white between one heartbeat and the next. His mobile device fell from numb fingers, striking the marble with an echo that appeared to stretch into infinity. The library, seconds earlier, humming with the charged anticipation of witnessed brutality, descended into such absolute quiet that all present could hear the vintage clock tower striking 11 in the evening. Each chime rang like a death knell for truths that should have remained concealed. 21 days prior, Rebecca Thorne had crossed the threshold through Whitmore Academy's substantial oak entrance, carrying solely a leather bag and a portable typewriter that appeared to have endured 2 world wars. At 24, she seemed nearly childlike with her white blonde hair plaited down her spine, circular wire-framed spectacles that appeared oversized for her delicate features, and a retro navy garment that rustled against her knees. Her speech carried the honey-slow accent of rural Georgia. Each word was thoughtfully selected and tenderly delivered, like someone fearful of shattering something fragile with excessive pressure. Principal Robert Blackwood had personally welcomed her in his workspace, an area that reeked of inherited wealth and more recent compromises. The mahogany walls displayed images of 3 successive generations of Blackwood males, all possessing the identical sharp jawline and predatory gaze. Robert Blackwood himself occupied a chair behind a workstation that exceeded most educators' yearly income, his Patek Philippe timepiece reflecting the morning sunlight as he motioned for Rebecca to be seated. Miss Thorne, he stated, his expression rehearsed and hollow, we're thrilled to have you join our English faculty. I trust you comprehend that Whitmore functions on particular traditions. We prize discretion, faithfulness, and understanding that certain pupils need special treatment. Rebecca had acknowledged with a nod, her digits tracing the border of her typewriter container with the automatic gesture of someone verifying a weapon. Naturally, Principal Blackwood, I support preserving established frameworks. Ultimately, every organization has its unique environment, correct? Those who hunt, those who are hunted, and those who merely watch. Something flickered in Robert Blackwood's gaze at the term, those who hunt. Yet Rebecca's demeanor stayed innocently agreeable. She extracted documents with her fountain pen, an antique object that belonged in a collection, and commenced completing forms with penmanship so exact it appeared nearly robotic. While she wrote, her vision cataloged everything, the specialized soundproofing that would silence cries, the concealed elevator beyond the shelf, the vault beneath a portrait of Thomas Blackwood Sr. in military uniform, and crucially, the surveillance monitor displaying camera feeds from throughout the institution except, notably, particular unseen areas in the library's historical section. I observe you've brought a typewriter, Principal Blackwood commented, his manner implying this was charming at best, troublesome at worst. We furnish all our educators with cutting-edge technology. Electronic trails persist eternally, Rebecca responded gently, her Georgia dialect transforming the words into something resembling a lullaby rather than a caution. Ink disappears with secrets. I discover something truthful about keys that strike paper, creating impressions that cannot be erased with a button press. Every keystroke represents a commitment, wouldn't you agree? The principal's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. How philosophical. Anyway, you'll discover our pupils favor contemporary approaches, particularly my son Thomas. He's in your third period AP Literature section. Outstanding athlete, honor roll, previously accepted early admission to Princeton. I'm confident you'll find him exemplary. Rebecca's digits paused on her documentation for precisely one pulse. I'm certain every father perceives excellence in his offspring. However, I've consistently discovered that genuine excellence doesn't require introduction. It proclaims itself. If you've encountered someone whose gentle exterior concealed something far deeper, you'll comprehend the chill that traveled down Principal Blackwood's back in that instant. Thomas Blackwood staged his entrance into Rebecca's third period AP Literature section, precisely 10 minutes following the bell. His arrival was orchestrated for greatest impact. 6 feet 2 inches of deliberately cultivated arrogance. He moved through the entrance as if he possessed not merely the classroom, but the atmosphere everyone else breathed. His Whitmore Academy varsity jacket, despite being May, functioned as both armor and advertisement simultaneously. Following him trailed his typical satellites, Harrison Fitzgerald, whose father controlled 3 publications, Brendan Ashford, successor to a pharmaceutical empire, and Dominic Cross, whose family's legal practice had maintained half of Connecticut's privileged out of incarceration. The class held its collective breath. They'd witnessed this performance previously with the past 3 English instructors, who'd lasted under a semester each. Mrs. Hamilton had transferred following mysterious images appearing on her spouse's device. Mr. Peterson had resigned after his dissertation was abruptly marked for plagiarism. 2 decades post-publication, Miss Rodriguez had simply disappeared one day. Her resignation letter composed on school stationery she insisted she'd never handled. Rebecca continued inscribing on the board, her cursive flowing like liquid across the surface. The sentence she'd selected for examination read, "The truth will liberate you. But initially, it will obliterate everything you've constructed on falsehoods." Intriguing selection, Thomas proclaimed to the room, not troubling with courtesies. However, I'd contend that truth is relative. What's genuine for one individual might be fantasy for another, particularly when one individual possesses power and another doesn't. The chalk in Rebecca's grasp never faltered. She completed her sentence, placed the chalk down with purposeful exactness, and rotated to confront him with an expression that belonged on a kindergarten instructor, not someone facing down a predator. A fascinating viewpoint. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you'd prefer to guide our examination on the character of truth in literature, though that would necessitate having completed the reading, wouldn't it? A handful of pupils gasped quietly. Nobody confronted Thomas Blackwood, not unless they desired their existences systematically ruined. Yet Rebecca stood there in her vintage garment and small spectacles, appearing as if she'd emerged from a 1950s teaching handbook, entirely unaware or unconcerned about the social hierarchies she just violated. Thomas's jaw tightened, yet his expression remained. He was too practiced to display genuine emotion. I don't require reading deceased authors to comprehend power, Miss Thorne. Some of us learn from lived experience. Experience? Rebecca repeated the term as if she was sampling something unusual. Indeed, I suppose inheriting experience from one's family could seem like personal accomplishment, like inheriting a timepiece and claiming you comprehend temporality. The classroom descended into silence. Even Thomas's group exchanged uncertain looks. Educators at Whitmore didn't respond defiantly, particularly not new ones, particularly not to Thomas Blackwood. Yet Rebecca had already turned back to the board, adding another quotation, "The transgressions of the father shall be imposed upon the sons unto the 3rd and 4th generation." Biblical, Thomas observed, his voice carrying an edge. How quaint. Though I favor Nietzsche, there are no certainties, only interpretations. Rebecca's typewriter occupied her desk, its keys gleaming in the afternoon illumination streaming through tall windows. She approached it slowly, traced her digits across the keys without depressing them, and then looked directly at Thomas. Nietzsche also stated, "Whoever battles monsters should ensure that in the process he doesn't become a monster." But perhaps that wisdom arrives too late for certain lineages. The term lineages suspended in the atmosphere like an indictment. Thomas rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. Are you suggesting something regarding my family, Miss Thorne? I'm suggesting nothing, Rebecca responded mildly, adjusting her spectacles with one delicate digit. I'm simply noting that patterns recur across generations unless someone elects to shatter them. But shattering patterns necessitates acknowledging they exist, and acknowledgement necessitates truth, which returns us to our original examination. She turned to the class, purposefully giving Thomas her back, a gesture so dismissive it might as well have been a strike. Who can inform me what pattern the author establishes in Chapter 3? Miranda Sullivan, typically too frightened to speak when Thomas was present, slowly raised her hand. Rebecca nodded encouragingly, and Miranda's voice, trembling initially, began to strengthen as she discussed the reading. Thomas remained standing for another moment, his presence attempting to intimidate through sheer physical dominance. Yet Rebecca continued instructing as if he were already departed. Finally, with a sharp gesture to his group, he sat down, but his gaze never departed Rebecca's face. Following class, as pupils filed out, Thomas made his initial move. He accidentally toppled Rebecca's coffee cup, sending dark liquid spreading across her desk, saturating into student papers. Whoops, he stated, not troubling to conceal his smirk. Clumsy hands. I suppose they'll need to rewrite those. Rebecca looked at the expanding stain, then at Thomas, her head tilted slightly like a bird examining something curious. Intriguing, she said quietly. Your penmanship would captivate graphologists. What? Thomas frowned, thrown by the non sequitur. Nothing significant. I was merely contemplating patterns. How the manner someone grasps a pen reveals their psychology. Pressure points, angle of attack, the violence or gentleness of their strokes. Your signature, for instance, the way you inscribe your name with such force the pen nearly penetrates through paper. It implies someone attempting very hard to leave a permanent impression, or perhaps attempting to write over something else. Thomas's face flushed. You're psychoanalyzing me based on penmanship? What are you, some variety of fortune teller? No, Rebecca said, extracting paper towels to clean the spill with methodical exactness. I'm someone who pays attention to particulars, like how you consistently destroy things with liquids, spilled beverages, water damage, floods of humiliation. There's something almost ceremonial about it, like a baptism in reverse, washing away dignity instead of sin. She looked up at him then, her eyes behind those round spectacles suddenly sharp as surgical instruments. Your grandfather possessed similar habits, didn't he? Though his methods were more permanent. The color drained from Thomas's face so rapidly that for a moment Rebecca thought he might collapse. What do you know about my grandfather? Only what's in the public record, Rebecca replied innocently, wringing out paper towels. Medal of Honor recipient interred with full military honors at Arlington Section 7, if I recall correctly. Though public records can be so incomplete, don't you think? They tell us what occurred, but rarely why. They show us the medals, but not the methods. Thomas backed away from her desk, his typical swagger completely evaporated. Stay away from my family's history. History, Rebecca mused, has a way of refusing to stay interred, particularly when it's been covered with falsehoods instead of earth. That evening, Rebecca remained in the library until 11 in the evening, long after even the most dedicated pupils had departed home. The old structure groaned and settled around her, its Gothic architecture creating shadows that appeared to move independently of their sources. She occupied the restricted archive section, her typewriter before her on an oak table scarred by decades of pupil use. The sound of her typing resonated through the empty stacks, click, clack, ding, as she reached the end of each line, the bell marking her progress like a countdown. Yet Rebecca wasn't composing lesson plans or grading rubrics. The pages emerging from her typewriter contained something far more hazardous. Names, dates, and a cipher that would have meant nothing to anyone watching. 7, 15, 23, 5, 18, then 2, 12, 15, 15, 4. Each number sequence carefully typed, the carbon paper beneath creating duplicate records that couldn't be compromised. Deleted or digitally erased, Mackenzie Walsh, the head librarian who often worked late cataloging new acquisitions, noticed the rhythmic typing and approached quietly. Mackenzie was one of those women who appeared to have been born middle-aged. Her cardigan collection was legendary among pupils, her ability to locate any book in the library's vast collection almost supernatural. She paused at the edge of Rebecca's table, her eyes scanning the typed pages with professional curiosity that quickly transformed into confusion. "Working late during your first week?" Mackenzie observed carefully. "That's dedication, though I'm uncertain I recognize the format you're using. Is that some variety of educational framework?" Rebecca's digits never paused in their typing. "You could say that. It's a very old framework, pre-digital, you might say, from a time when secrets had to be kept in code because there was no encryption except human ingenuity." "A cipher?" Mackenzie leaned closer, her librarian's instinct for knowledge overcoming social propriety. "Yet the pattern doesn't match any classical cipher I know. Not Caesar, not Visionaire, not even a book cipher." Rebecca finally stopped typing, her digits resting on the keys like a pianist pausing between movements. She looked up at Mackenzie, and for just a moment, the mild-mannered teacher facade slipped, revealing something underneath that made Mackenzie take an involuntary step backward. "Some ciphers aren't meant to conceal information," Rebecca said quietly. "They're meant to preserve it, to ensure that even if the messenger is silenced, the message survives. My mother taught me this one. She learned it from someone who learned the hardest way possible that some secrets are worth dying for, and others are worth killing for." Before Mackenzie could respond, the lights in the library flickered. Both women looked up, but the illumination steadied after a moment. Still, Rebecca began packing her typewriter with swift efficiency, her movements suddenly military in their precision. "You should go home." "Mackenzie," Rebecca said, her Georgia accent more pronounced, softening the command into a suggestion. "Libraries can be hazardous after midnight. All those old stories waiting to come alive." The following morning, a package arrived for Rebecca during her free period. The delivery person seemed nervous, insisting she sign for it personally, checking her identification twice before handing over the small wooden box. Inside her empty classroom, Rebecca opened it with steady hands, though her breathing had quickened slightly. 7 brass casings lay nestled in velvet, old enough to be antiques, each one engraved with a single letter, WITNESS. She picked up one casing, holding it to the light. The brass was tarnished with age, yet the engraving was deep and clear. These weren't just any casings. The caliber, the specific markings on the base, the patina of age. They were from M1 Garand rounds, standard issue for American forces in Korea. She knew because she'd seen identical casings before in a box of her mother's possessions that had been concealed in a safety deposit box for 20 years. The classroom door opened without a knock. Thomas Blackwood entered with his typical arrogance restored, though something flickered in his eyes when he saw the box on her desk. Behind him, his group spread out, blocking the doorway in a practiced formation that implied this wasn't their first intimidation campaign. "Private delivery?" Thomas inquired, his voice carrying false casualness. Mysterious packages arriving at school could be concerning. Perhaps security should be notified. Rebecca carefully placed the casing back in the box, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Just some antique supplies for a historical literature project. I support teaching with authentic materials. These, for instance, are from the Korean War era. Amazing what stories old metal can tell if you know how to listen." "Korean War," Thomas repeated, and this time the color definitely drained from his face. "That's ancient history. 1950 to 1953, Rebecca corrected. "Not so ancient. Your grandfather served, didn't he? Staff Sergeant Michael Blackwood, quite the war hero, according to the official records." Harrison Fitzgerald shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you so interested in Thomas's family history?" Rebecca smiled, that kindergarten teacher smile that was beginning to unnerve everyone who saw it. "I'm interested in all history, Mr. Fitzgerald, particularly the parts that people try to enter. Did you know that the military keeps remarkably detailed records? Every bullet fired, every casualty reported, every medal awarded. And sometimes when you compare those records to each other, you find fascinating discrepancies." She pulled out a piece of paper from her desk, aged and yellow. It was a photocopy of a military form, mostly redacted with black bars, yet certain words were visible. "Fratricide incident. 6 witnesses. Investigation terminated." Thomas lunged forward, attempting to grab the paper, yet Rebecca pulled it back with surprising speed. "That's private property," he snarled. "You have no right." "Actually, it's public record," Rebecca corrected. "Available to anyone who knows where to look and what questions to ask." though I admit it helps when your mother spent 17 years collecting evidence before she died." The room went silent. Thomas's hands were shaking now, real fear replacing his typical aggression. "Your mother was Catherine Walsh," Rebecca said simply. "You wouldn't know the name. She was very good at being invisible, right up until she wasn't, and then she was dead. Cancer, officially. Though it's amazing how many witnesses to your grandfather's activities developed aggressive cancers in their 40s and 50s, almost like they'd been exposed to something toxic, something that took years to kill them but left no evidence of foul play." Brendan Ashford stepped forward. "You're insane. You're making wild accusations about something that happened 70 years ago." 71 years, Rebecca corrected. "And I'm not making accusations. I'm noting patterns, like how every witness to what really occurred in Section 7 ended up deceased within 20 years. All except one, the one who was smart enough to conceal her identity, change her name, and spend decades gathering proof. My mother was witness number 7. She died 5 years ago, but not before she told me everything. And more importantly, not before she taught me how to finish what she started." Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went even paler. The text was from his father. "Come to my office immediately. Bring your friends." "Tell no one. Father calling?" Rebecca asked mildly. "I imagine he's just received some interesting correspondence of his own." "Did you know that the Pentagon keeps copies of all correspondence related to cover-ups?" "They have to, for legal reasons. And sometimes if someone files the right FOIA requests with the right specific details, those documents have to be released, even if they prove that a Medal of Honor was awarded to cover up the murder of 6 American soldiers who witnessed war crimes." Thomas stood frozen in the classroom, his mobile device trembling in his grasp as his father's text seared into his retina. The walls of Whitmore Academy, which had always seemed like extensions of his own authority, abruptly appeared to be constricting around him. Rebecca Thorne continued arranging the brass casings in their container with methodical exactness, each movement deliberate as a chess player. "Positioning pieces for checkmate. You should depart," she stated without looking up. "Principal Blackwood dislikes being kept waiting, though I suspect this time he's the one who will be doing the waiting. Federal investigations tend to proceed at their own pace." Harrison Fitzgerald grabbed Thomas's arm. "We need to leave now." Yet Thomas couldn't move, couldn't look away from this woman who'd appeared from nowhere, and somehow knew secrets that should have been interred with bones in Arlington. "Before you go," Rebecca added, finally meeting his eyes, "you should know that I don't want you, Thomas. You're just a symptom of a disease that started long before you were born. But symptoms can choose to become something else, or they can metastasize. The choice, as they say, is yours." The 4 boys fled the classroom, their typical swagger replaced by something approaching panic. Rebecca listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway, then carefully locked the wooden box in her desk drawer. She pulled out her typewriter, loaded a fresh sheet of paper, and began typing. "Contact established. Subject aware but not yet comprehending. Phase 2 initiated." Over the following days, Thomas's behavior shifted from aggressive to erratic. He showed up to Rebecca's class but sat in sullen silence, his eyes tracking her every movement while his friends whispered nervously among themselves. The typical small torments, the spilled drinks, the destroyed homework, the casual cruelties that had driven away previous teachers, ceased entirely. Instead, Thomas watched and waited like a predator trying to understand why its prey wasn't running. Rebecca continued instructing as if nothing had changed, though she'd noticed the black sedan that now followed her home each evening, always staying 3 cars behind, never quite close enough to photograph clearly. She'd also noticed how certain pupils suddenly couldn't meet her eyes, how conversation stopped when she entered the faculty lounge, how Principal Blackwood's secretary had started making copies of all her class materials. The escalation came on Thursday evening. Rebecca had stayed late again, typing in the library's restricted section while rain hammered against the Gothic windows. The sound masked the footsteps until they were almost upon her. Not Thomas this time, but 3 men in maintenance uniforms she'd never seen before. Their movements were too coordinated for janitors, their eyes too sharp for minimum wage workers. "Miss Thorne," the leader said, his accent distinctly not New England, "you need to come with us. There's been a security concern." Rebecca's digits never left the typewriter keys. How intriguing. "A security concern that requires 3 maintenance workers who've never worked here before tonight. She hit the return key, the bell dinging in the silence. Tell whoever sent you that Catherine Walsh's daughter doesn't frighten easily. Also, your shoulder holster is showing under your left arm. Maintenance workers rarely need Glock 19s to fix leaky pipes. The man's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, yet Rebecca was already standing, her typewriter in her hands. Do you know what a 1942 Remington typewriter weighs? 16 pounds of solid metal. My mother knocked a man unconscious with one in 1987 when he came for her in the middle of the night. She was witness number 7. I'm witness number 8. And unlike her, I've been preparing for you my entire life. The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the library. In the black, Rebecca moved with practiced precision, muscle memory from years of training in dark rooms guiding her between the stacks. Behind her, the men cursed and fumbled for flashlights, their night vision ruined by the sudden transition. By the time emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red, Rebecca had vanished, leaving only her typewriter behind with a sheet of paper still in it. 2 words typed in the center. Not yet. The following morning, Rebecca arrived at school to find her classroom vandalized. Every surface was covered in red spray paint spelling out variations of leave and you're next. Her typewriter, which she'd retrieved from the library before dawn, sat untouched on her desk, almost mocking in its pristine condition amid the destruction. Principal Blackwood stood in the doorway, his face a mask of false concern. Miss Thorne, I'm shocked by this vandalism. We'll investigate immediately. Though without security footage from this particular hallway, it may be difficult to identify the perpetrators. No need, Rebecca said calmly, running her digit through the still wet paint. Sherwin-Williams Premium Exterior, Crimson Tide shade, purchased yesterday at 4:17 p.m. from Hartley's Hardware on Mason Street. Paid for with a credit card belonging to Thomas Blackwood. He's not very good at covering his tracks, is he? Must not have inherited his grandfather's talent for hiding evidence. Robert Blackwood's face darkened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Just like it's a fact that you've been embezzling from the school's federal funding for special needs pupils. Just like it's a fact that your father didn't die a hero in Korea but murdered 6 fellow soldiers who witnessed him executing prisoners for sport. Just like it's a fact that someone has been killing the descendants of those witnesses for the past 20 years, and Thomas is probably next on the list. The principal stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. When he spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of civility. You have no idea what you're dealing with. There are people, powerful people, who've spent decades ensuring certain truths stay interred. They won't hesitate to enter you alongside them. They already tried, Rebecca replied, pulling out a photograph from her desk. It showed 3 men in maintenance uniforms, their faces clearly visible in library security footage that supposedly didn't exist. Yet I have my own cameras, my own recordings, everything backed up to servers you can't reach in countries you can't influence. If something happens to me, everything goes public. Pentagon files, financial records, and a particularly interesting video of you meeting with men who definitely aren't on the school's payroll, but seem very interested in your family's history. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I'm not here to destroy you, Principal Blackwood. I'm here because someone wants your son deceased. And despite everything, I don't believe children should pay for their grandfather's transgressions. But if you or Thomas push me, I'll stop protecting him and start avenging my mother. The choice is yours. That afternoon, Rebecca noticed Thomas following her to the library after school. Not with his typical crew, but alone, moving through the hallways like a ghost of his former self. She continued to her typical spot in the restricted section, set up her typewriter, and began her ritual typing. He appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, his face pale and drawn. My father says you're lying, he said without preamble. That you're just another grifter trying to extort money from successful families. Your father knows I'm telling the truth, Rebecca replied, not looking up from her typing. That's why he's frightened. That's why there's a suitcase in his office packed with cash and fake passports. That's why he's been on the phone with lawyers in countries without extradition treaties. Thomas moved closer, his hands clenched into fists. My grandfather was a hero. He has a Medal of Honor. He's buried in Arlington. Section 7, row 15, Rebecca said quietly. I've been there, have you? Have you ever wondered why no other Blackwoods are interred near him? Why your grandmother insisted on being cremated rather than buried beside her war hero husband? Why your father never visits the grave. She pulled out another photograph, this one older, black and white. It showed 7 soldiers in Korea, winter of 1952. One face was circled in red. That's your grandfather. The other 6 are the witnesses. Private James Holman, shot in the back during a night patrol, friendly fire never investigated. Corporal Anthony Reed, Jeep accident on a clear road with no other vehicles. Sergeant Bruno Kowalski, training accident with live ammunition that shouldn't have been there. Private David Chen, fell from a guard tower in broad daylight with no witnesses. Corporal Martin Hughes, food poisoning that killed only him out of 200 men who ate the same meal. And Private First Class William Walsh, my mother's father, who survived the war but died in a suspicious house fire in 1976. Along with his wife, leaving my mother an orphan at 9, Thomas stared at the photographs, his world reconstructing itself with each image. Even if this is true, it was 70 years ago. It has nothing to do with me. 3 weeks ago, your cousin Matthew in Boston fell from his apartment balcony. Suicide, according to the police. 2 months ago, your Uncle Richard in Seattle died in a car accident. Brake failure on a vehicle he'd just had serviced. 6 months ago, your father's brother in Miami drowned in his pool, even though he'd been a competitive swimmer in college. Someone is killing Blackwood men, Thomas. And you're the last of your generation. The blood drained from Thomas's face entirely. Who? Who's doing this? I don't know yet, Rebecca admitted, finally looking up from her typewriter. Yet they're professional, patient, and methodical. They've been eliminating witnesses and their families for 20 years, making every death look accidental. My mother figured out the pattern just before her cancer diagnosis. She spent her last 5 years gathering evidence, preparing me, making sure someone would know the truth even if she didn't survive to tell it. Thomas sank into a chair, his trembling hands covering his face. Why are you telling me this? Why not just let them kill me too? Because you're 18 years old and stupid, not evil. Because someone needs to break the cycle of violence that your grandfather started. Because my mother taught me that justice and revenge aren't the same thing, even when they wear the same mask. She resumed typing, the rhythm almost hypnotic in the quiet library. Also because I need bait. Whoever's hunting your family will come for you eventually. When they do, I'll be watching. Your death won't bring back the witnesses, but catching your killers might stop them from creating more. The sound that escaped Thomas was halfway between a laugh and a sob. So I'm bait. That's why you're here originally? Yes. Yet then I met you, and you're exactly what I expected. Entitled, cruel, enabled by a system that protects predators. Any sympathy I might have had died when I watched you destroy Miranda Sullivan's scholarship essay because she refused to write your term paper. But then I kept watching, and I saw something else. Fear. Not just of consequences, but of becoming the monster everyone already thinks you are. She stopped typing and pulled the page from the machine. On it was a single paragraph repeated over and over. The transgressions of the fathers shall be imposed upon the sons. This is your chance, Thomas. Help me catch who's hunting your family. Make amends for what your grandfather did, or continue being the person everyone expects you to be and die badly. Probably within the month. Definitely alone. That night, everything changed. Thomas arrived at the library at 10 o'clock as Rebecca had instructed. He came alone, no swagger left in his walk, looking younger than his 18 years. Rebecca was at her typical spot, yet this time the typewriter was silent. Instead, she had documents spread across the table, military records, police reports, death certificates, creating a map of murder across decades. I spoke to my father, Thomas said quietly. He admitted some of it, not everything, but enough. My grandfather was a monster. He killed those men because they saw him execute Korean prisoners, teenagers who'd already surrendered. He shot them for sport, then killed the witnesses one by one, making it look like combat casualties. And the medal? Rebecca asked. Cover up. The army didn't want the scandal, so they turned him into a hero instead, buried the investigation, classified the files, threatened the families of the deceased soldiers to keep quiet. His voice broke. My whole family is built on blood and falsehoods. Before Rebecca could respond, the lights went out. This time she knew it wasn't a power failure. The emergency lighting didn't activate. The darkness was complete, deliberate, professional. She heard Thomas's sharp intake of breath, then footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision through the stacks. Thomas, she whispered. Get under the table now. Red laser dots appeared in the darkness, dancing across the walls like deadly fireflies. A voice, accented and cold, resonated through the library. Witness 8 located. Blackwood Air is bonus. Artemis Protocol authorized. Rebecca moved in the darkness, her hand finding the exact book she'd prepared for this moment. Behind a false spine was a ceramic knife, undetectable by metal detectors, sharp enough to cut through Kevlar. Artemis, she called out, her voice steady. I was wondering when you'd show yourselves. 20 years of wet work, and you're just now getting sloppy enough to be noticed. The voice laughed. Catherine Walsh's daughter. We should have killed you years ago, yet you were so good at hiding. Then you came here, practically gift-wrapped yourself for us. Or maybe I brought you exactly where I wanted you, Rebecca replied, moving silently between the stacks. Did you think I didn't know about Artemis? Pentagon Black Ops cleaning up Cold War embarrassments, eliminating anyone who might embarrass the military-industrial complex. My mother spent 17 years mapping your operations. The first attacker came from the left, fast and professional. Yet Rebecca had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. The ceramic knife found the gap in his tactical vest, dropping him before he could scream. The second came from behind, yet she heard his breathing, spun, and let his momentum carry him into a bookshelf that toppled with a crash. Thomas watched from under the table as Rebecca became something entirely different from the mild-mannered teacher he'd tormented. She moved like water through the darkness, every motion economical, lethal, precise. The typewriter she'd carried for weeks became a weapon, swung with devastating force into an attacker's skull. Books became projectiles. The very architecture of the library became her ally, as she led the hunters into dead ends and bottlenecks. Yet there were too many. Eventually, numbers would overwhelm skill. A knife appeared from the darkness, slicing across her ribs. A fist connected with her jaw, sending her sprawling. She rolled, came up fighting. Yet another attacker grabbed her from behind. This was how it would end, in the dark, like her mother's fears made manifest. Then the lights exploded back on, blindingly bright. FBI agents flooded the library, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. The Artemis operatives froze, caught between their target and federal agents who definitely weren't supposed to be there. Rebecca pulled herself free, blood soaking through her vintage dress, and smiled that kindergarten teacher smile one last time. Did you really think I came here alone? She asked the lead operative. That I would walk into the trap without backup? I've been broadcasting everything to the FBI for 3 weeks. Every conversation, every threat, every moment. My typewriter doesn't just type, it transmits. Old technology hiding new capabilities. You're all under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and violating about 17 federal statutes I'm too tired to list. The lead operative tried to run, yet Thomas, surprising everyone including himself, stuck out his foot. The man went down hard, his head striking marble with a sound like a dropped melon. Thomas stood over him, shaking but determined. That's for my cousin Matthew, he said quietly, and my uncle Richard, and all the others you killed because my grandfather was a monster. As the FBI led the Artemis operatives away in chains, Rebecca leaned against her typewriter, exhausted. Thomas approached carefully, like someone approaching a wounded predator. You're not really a teacher, are you? No, Rebecca admitted. I'm not FBI either, before you ask. I'm something more complicated. A keeper of secrets, a protector of witnesses, someone who makes sure the truth survives, even when the witnesses don't. And now? Thomas asked. What happens now? Now you have a choice. Your grandfather's crimes are about to become very public. Your father's embezzlement, too. The Blackwood name is about to become synonymous with scandal. You can run, hide, change your name, and pretend none of this happened. Or you can stay, face it, make amends, and maybe become something better than your bloodline suggests. Principal Robert Blackwood was arrested the following morning, led from his office in handcuffs while news crews captured every moment. The story exploded across headlines. Korean War atrocities covered up for 70 years. Pentagon Black Ops unit eliminated witnesses for decades. Hero teacher exposed multi-generational conspiracy. Yet Rebecca Thorne had already vanished. Her apartment was empty, no forwarding address, no digital footprint, as if she'd never existed at all. The only trace was a single typed page left on Thomas's desk. Your protection ends when your choices begin. Choose wisely. Thomas stood in the empty classroom holding the paper when he noticed something else on the desk, a Polaroid photograph of himself taken from outside the school. On the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize, Witness 9 identified. Protection terminated. Corvus. He looked up to find a new pupil standing in the doorway, tall, thin, with black hair and eyes so dark they appeared to absorb light. The boy smiled, and Thomas felt his blood turn to ice water. "I'm Salvatore," the boy said, his accent unplaceable. "Salvatore Corvus. I believe we're going to be very good friends, Thomas. After all, we have so much in common, grandfathers with secrets, family legacies written in blood, and someone out there who wants us both deceased." He walked to Rebecca's old typewriter, which somehow had been left behind, and traced his digits across the keys. Without pressing anything, the machine began typing on its own, Nevermore. Thomas ran from the room, yet he could hear Salvatore's laughter following him down the hallway, resonating off the walls like the cawing of ravens. In the library, Mackenzie Walsh found a single black feather on Rebecca's typical table next to a note in that same unfamiliar handwriting. The pupil becomes the instructor. The hunter becomes the hunted. The witness becomes the testifier. As night descended over Whitmore Academy, a conspiracy 7 decades in the making had been exposed. Yet something older and darker had taken its place. Thomas Blackwood, no longer the predator he'd once been, was about to discover that some family secrets are better left interred, and some protectors are more hazardous than the threats they guard against. The typewriter in the empty classroom continued its phantom typing long into the night, spelling out names of the deceased and the soon-to-be deceased, while somewhere in the darkness, Rebecca Thorne drove toward her next assignment, her next identity. Her next secret to expose or enter the war between truth and falsehoods never ends. It just finds new battlefields and new soldiers to sacrifice. In her rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of black wings against the moon and smiled. Salvatore Corvus had finally shown himself. The real game was about to begin.